The map hit the table like a verdict. Lieutenant Colonel Harwick, not the one in the name list, this was a different Harwick, same name, different man, looked around the room once, made a decision with his eyes, and started talking before everyone had even found a seat. He got 3 sentences into the mission brief before he stopped, looked directly at the woman in the back corner, and said to his senior NCO, "Why is she in this room?" Staff Sergeant Dara Keane had been in the Army long enough not to flinch at that. She was 31. She had done 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Syria. She had a qualification score on the M24 that only 4 people in the battalion had ever matched, and she had matched it twice. She sat with her notepad on her knee and her pen uncapped because she'd been told 0600, Building 7, full kit, and she had done exactly that. The senior NCO, Master Sergeant Hollowell, looked at the back corner, then back at the lieutenant colonel and said nothing. "I want to know who authorized the marksman slot to be filled by." Harwick paused here, just long enough for it to mean something, to be filled by someone who has never run a long-range support position in a kinetic environment. He wasn't wrong, technically. Keane had never held the designated marksman role in an official capacity. She'd filled it 3 times in an unofficial one, twice in Syria when the assigned shooter had been pulled back for medical, once in a situation that nobody wrote a report about. But on paper, Harwick was correct. She had never done it on paper. She was assigned based on her qual scores, Hollowell said. He said it in the flat, careful voice of a man who had learned when to say exactly enough. "Top of the company, scores are not field experience?" "No, sir. Pull her assignment. I want Richter." Richter was 24 years old. He had 1 deployment. His qualification score was 11 points below Keane's. She knew this because the scores were posted and she had looked. Hollowell said, "Richter's on medical hold. Left shoulder." There was a pause. "Then I want someone else." "There isn't someone else, sir. Not at that distance." The distance in question was 1,640 meters. The target was a communications relay on a ridgeline above a valley the insurgents had been using as a logistics corridor for 8 months. You couldn't get an air asset in without alerting the network. You couldn't get a ground team close enough without being seen first. The only way to take the relay down cleanly was a single shot from a hide position across the valley, and there was only 1 window in the schedule, and it was in 4 days. Harwick looked at Keane again. She looked back at him. "Fine," he said, and he didn't say it like a man who had changed his mind. He said it like a man who was noting something in a ledger. She wrote it down in her notepad. Fine, she didn't write that. She wrote the grid coordinates instead. Keane had grown up in a small town outside Fredericton, New Brunswick, in a house at the end of a gravel road where the nearest neighbor was a 20-minute walk. Her father was a civil engineer who spent his evenings rebuilding a 1967 pickup that never quite got finished. Her mother had been a school librarian until she wasn't, and then she'd become a school librarian again. Because that was the kind of person she was, the kind who goes back to what she knows. She'd learned to shoot when she was 12, deer season, her father's old .308, not because she was trying to become anything, just because it was there, and she was curious, and her father had taught her, the way he taught her everything. Patiently, once, and then stepped back and let her figure out the rest. She joined the Army at 20 because she'd had 2 years of university, realized it wasn't pointing anywhere specific, and decided she wanted something that did. She was good at it immediately. Not flashy good, methodical good. The kind of good that doesn't announce itself until it's already done what it came to do. The first time someone made a joke about women in the military, she was 3 weeks in. She didn't respond to the joke. She just put her next shot through the same hole as the last one and let it sit there. That was her general approach. The problem she had come to understand was that her general approach required other people to look. And in her experience, people who had already decided not to see you were very good at not seeing what was directly in front of them. Harwick was not unusual. He was, in fact, completely typical of a certain kind of officer. Not cruel, not stupid, just operating from a model of the world that had been built before she existed, and he had no particular reason to update it. He was 47 years old. He had served with distinction. His model of who was capable of what had been calibrated over 20 years, and it did not include her. She did not hate him for this. She found it useful to understand, because it meant she knew exactly what she was working with. What she was working with was no goodwill, no benefit of the doubt, and a window of 4 days to demonstrate something he did not believe could be demonstrated. Fine. The valley was called something in Pashto that the maps had transliterated into 3 different spellings depending on which agency had drawn them. The Americans called it Kellen Valley, which was close enough to none of the original spellings that it had ceased to mean anything. Keane called it the Valley, because that's what it was, and she didn't have time for names that didn't mean anything. She spent the first day on reconnaissance, not dramatic reconnaissance, not night vision and suppressed rifles. She sat in a room with 8 satellite images, 2 topographic maps, and a wind analysis that the meteorology sergeant had generated at her request. And she built a picture in her head of what the ground looked like without standing on it. The ridgeline was at 2,340 meters elevation. The target, the communications relay, was at 2,190. Her hide position, based on the angles, would need to be approximately 1,640 meters south-southwest, at a lower elevation shooting uphill at approximately 4.8 degrees. She calculated the ballistic correction for uphill angle. She calculated the density altitude correction for 800 meters above sea level. She factored the average wind speed in the valley corridor, 12 kilometers per hour, predominantly northwest, and the standard deviation. She built a firing solution from first principles, checked it twice, and wrote it in pencil in a small notebook she kept in her left breast pocket. Then she went back and checked the meteorology data again, because the first time through anything was draft. Corporal Yoon, her spotter for the op, came to find her around 1400 hours. He was 27, newly assigned, and he had the look of a man who was trying to decide how seriously to take her. She recognized the look. She had seen it enough times that she could have described it from memory. He sat down across the table, looked at the maps, and said, "You've been at this since 0700. Yes. Do you want coffee? Already had some." He looked at the firing solution she had written out. He did not say anything, which meant he was either confused or thinking. She waited. "That elevation correction," he said. "You're using the cosine method?" "Yes, some people use the RBC table. The RBC table is accurate to 300 meters. We're at 1600. He nodded slowly. "Okay." He picked up the meteorology printout. "You've adjusted for temperature? Density altitude accounts for temperature." "Right." He set it down. "I've run Overwatch at 1100 meters. Not 16. I know. That's a long way." "Yes," she said. "It is." She didn't say it to dismiss him. She said it because it was true, and she found it useful to say true things plainly. Yun sat with that for a moment, then nodded once more, and picked up one of the satellite images to look at it properly. From that point on, he did not ask whether she knew what she was doing. He asked questions that assumed she did. It was a small shift, and it mattered. On the second day, they did a site survey of the approach route. On the third day, Keane ran the ballistic calculations again from scratch, got the same answer, and decided she trusted them. On the evening of the third day, she had a conversation she had not been expecting. She was in the meal hall, late enough that it was mostly empty, eating something that had started as chicken and had become a question mark somewhere between the kitchen and the tray. Sergeant First Class Brennan, one of the company's senior NCOs, came in, got a coffee, and sat down across from her without asking. Brennan had deployed 4 times. He was not a man who sat down uninvited unless he had something specific to say. "Harwick's been making calls," he said. Keane cut a piece of chicken. About whether someone else can take the shot." She chewed. "And nobody else is available." He said it in a way that indicated this was not news to her. "He's also been asking around about your qual scores, whether the conditions were standard." She put her fork down. The conditions had been standard. She had taken the test in Fort Bragg on a calm morning with no mitigating factors. The range officer had been a man named Pelletier, who was thorough to the point of tedium and would have flagged anything that wasn't regulation. Her scores were clean. "He's entitled to ask," she said. "He is." Brennan looked at his coffee. "I've been in this army for 19 years, Sergeant. I've seen a lot of things. One thing I've seen is that when someone works this hard to find a reason why a person can't do something and can't find the reason, they usually just move on to watching very closely for the moment the person fails." She waited. "I'm not telling you to be nervous about it," he said. "I'm telling you so you know what the environment looks like going in. I appreciate that. Do you?" He looked at her directly. "Because the right response to this situation is to take the shot and then act like you always knew you would. Not to be grateful someone warned you. People who get thanked for warnings end up giving a lot of them instead of changing anything." She thought about that. It was the truest thing anyone had said to her in a month. "Okay," she said. "Thank you, Sergeant." And I mean that less than I just said. Something shifted in his face that might have been the beginning of a smile. He got up, took his coffee, and left. She picked up her fork and finished her dinner. Insertion was 0330, which meant cold ground and black sky, and the smell of the valley coming up on the wind. Pine resin and something mineral, like the ground was made of old metal. Keane and Ewan moved without talking. They had rehearsed the route twice in daylight, once on the map, and once in their heads, and now they moved through it the way you move through something you have memorized. Not thinking about the sequence, because the sequence had become automatic, just paying attention to what was different from the plan. The hide position was behind a shelf of fractured limestone, 40 meters below the ridgeline, looking across the valley at an angle that would have been inconvenient if she hadn't already calculated for it. She settled into it and let her body adjust to the ground. You couldn't fight the ground. You could work with it and let it work back. Ewan set up the spotting scope and began logging wind data. He called every 2 minutes, not because she asked him to, but because he had decided that was the right interval, and she had decided he was right. The light came slowly. First, the sky went from black to the kind of dark blue that feels like the moment before something happens. And then the ridgeline across the valley began to separate from the sky, and then the details started to resolve. The rocks, the sparse vegetation, the outline of the relay structure, 2/3 of the way up the eastern slope. She found the target through the scope. It was a communications relay, a stacked antenna array with a hardened junction box at the base, mounted on a concrete pad the insurgents had poured sometime in the past 18 months. The junction box was the target, 12 centimeters wide, facing south. She could see the near edge of it from her position. She could not see the junction directly. She would be shooting through a 14-degree window between a rock formation and the edge of the antenna housing. 14 degrees was enough. She had done the geometry. Wind reading, she said, 8 kilometers per hour at origin southwest, 11 kilometers per hour estimated at midpoint. I'm seeing some gusting above the ridgeline, but nothing steady. She noted it. The gusting above the ridgeline was the variable she'd been least certain about. Thermal convection from the eastern face of the ridge as the sun came up. It would change the bullet's path in the last 200 meters of travel. Enough to matter, not enough to be predictable. She would have to read it. What's the window? Ewan asked. Whenever the thermal stabilizes. He looked up from the scope. That could be. I know. We wait. They waited. The sun came up. The eastern face of the ridge caught it first, and the thermals started, just as she'd expected. Small, irregular, the wind above the ridgeline shearing and shifting. Through the scope, she watched the vegetation on the slope, the way the dry grass moved, looking for the moment when it stopped being irregular and became consistent. 37 minutes after sunrise, the thermal found its morning pattern. The grass settled into a rhythm. She could read it now. Wind at origin, 7 kilometers per. Steady southwest, she settled the reticle. She breathed out halfway. She let her heart rate finish the beat it was already on. She made the adjustment for the thermal. Not the full correction, because the thermal would push the bullet north, and she needed to land at the south edge of the junctions box face. She squeezed. The crack was immediate, and then it was gone. Swallowed by the valley. Through the scope, Ewan said, hit, junction face, confirmed. She said nothing for a moment. She pulled back from the scope and let the stillness be what it was. Then she said, log it. The debrief was at 1800 hours. Harwick ran it. He had the satellite confirmation images on the screen, and he walked through what had happened in the way that officers walk through successful operations when they were not expecting success. Methodically, with a kind of compressed energy, like a man trying to account for a variable his model hadn't included. He did not say, I was wrong about you. He did not say, well done, Sergeant Keane. What he said was, the relay is down, the window held, we're on schedule. He said it to the room, and then he turned to the next slide. Keane sat at the back of the room and wrote notes in her notebook and did not expect anything different. She had not done this to change Harwick's mind. She had done it because the relay needed to come down, and she was the person who could do it. Those were different things, and she had stopped confusing them a long time ago. Ewan was beside her. After the debrief ended and people started filing out, he leaned over and said quietly, 1,100 meters was the farthest I'd run Overwatch before today. She looked at him. I just wanted to say, he said, I was watching your process the whole time. The wind reading, how you adjusted for the thermal. I've been watching spotters for 4 years, and I've never seen anyone hold that long for a condition window. He stopped. That's all. I just thought you should hear it. She thought about Brennan's advice, about thanking people less, but Yoon wasn't warning her about something. He was telling her what he had seen. That was different. Good, she said. Now you know what it looks like. He nodded. Yeah, he said. I do. The commendation came 6 weeks later. It arrived in a unit envelope that had been opened and resealed. Someone had sorted it into the admin distribution without flagging it, and it sat in the stack for 2 days before Hollowell noticed it and brought it to her himself. It was a Meritorious Service Medal, appropriate citation, accurate description of the action, signed by the right people. She stood in Hollowell's office and read it. That should have been presented, he said. He meant in formation, with the unit present, the way decorations were supposed to be presented, not handed to her in an office in an envelope that had already been opened. It should have, she said. I'm sorry about that. She looked up. Hollowell was not a man who apologized often, and when he did it was because he meant it, not because it was polite. Thank you, Master Sergeant. She folded the citation and put it in her breast pocket, beside the notebook. There was a thing she had learned about recognition, which was that the certificate was never really the point. What you did was what you did. The paper was just paper. The record was the record, and someone with clearance and time could go read it anytime they wanted, and it would say exactly what had happened on that morning, in that valley, through a 14-degree window at 1,640 meters. That didn't go away. She had 1 more year on her contract at that point. She re-enlisted, not because of the operation, not because of anything that had happened in that debrief room or in Hollowell's office. She re-enlisted because she woke up the morning, her paperwork was due, and thought about what she would do otherwise and couldn't construct a convincing answer. The work was real. The problems were real. The solutions, when you found them, were real. That mattered more than a lot of things people spent their lives looking for. Harwick rotated out of the battalion 8 months later. She heard he'd gone to a staff position at division. She didn't follow it after that. She went to another deployment. She did her work. She got better at the things she was already good at, and she found new things to get better at. And on days when the light in the valley came up clean and cold, and the wind held what she told it to, she knew exactly why she was still there. The notebook she'd used for the operation was in a box at her mother's house, tucked inside a plastic bag to keep the moisture out. On the page with the firing solution, she had written one note at the bottom that wasn't part of the calculation. She'd written it after the debrief when she got back to her bunk and had a few minutes before lights out. It said, thermal window, 37 min. Held, that was it. No commentary, no reflection, just the number and the fact. And she always did it that way, which meant she left nothing to assumption and nothing to luck.